as we know, when someone has a problem, and opioid addiction, serious mental illness, they all interfere with being able to earn a living. And what happens when you're not able to earn a living is you need a place to live. And often what people do is they come home and they knock on the door to mama to say, can I move back in?
Welcome to Zestful Aging, the podcast where we celebrate aging with vibrance and we defy the stereotypes of what it means to age. I'm your host, Nicole Christina, a psychotherapist of more than 30 years, here to introduce you to my off-the-mainstream guests who will energize and inspire you. My hope is to create optimism about getting older and help you cultivate zest and joy in this season of your life. And I love to hear feedback from you, my listeners. Please drop me a line at zestfulaging@gmail.com. I read every single comment. And to find out more about this podcast, hop on over to zestfulaging.com. We have a really important, though not much discussed topic today. As mothers and grandmothers, the overwhelming shame can actually get in the way of us talking about this. When our child has a mental illness or substance abuse problem, we often focus on the adult child and getting them help if they are willing. But how do the adult child's difficulties impact upon the mother, and how long is she responsible for parenting her troubled child? And if he or she is violent, does she call the police on her own child? Our guest today has written a groundbreaking book that has sparked a long overdue conversation about the hidden and prolonged struggles of older mothers with adult children facing serious mental health and substance abuse challenges. Dr. Judith Smith is the author of Difficult: Mothering Challenging Adult Children Through Conflict and Change. Drawing from her extensive research and the heartfelt stories of 50 women, Dr. Smith coined the term difficult adult child to describe the strain of dealing with issues such as serious mental health, chronic unemployment, and substance abuse disorder in one's adult children. Today, we're going to talk about the dilemma mothers and grandmothers find themselves in when they have a difficult adult child. And I am going to issue a trigger warning here. We are going to be talking about some pretty intense, traumatic phenomenon here. So just be aware of that. Welcome to the show, Judy. I'm so honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I really look forward to talking with you.
That's wonderful. So I wanted to start with this notion that, for years we have been very aware that there is an opioid crisis in our country, and we hear about it on the news. We know all about it, but what we don't hear about is how this affects the parents, specifically the mothers, and even more specifically, older mothers. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think this is true not only with opioid addiction, but with serious mental illness, with other forms, alcohol addiction. We only hear conversations about the person who has the problem. But clearly, as we know, when someone has a problem, and opioid addiction, serious mental illness, they all interfere with being able to earn a living. And what happens when you're not able to earn a living is you need a place to live. And often what people do is they come home and they knock on the door to mama to say, can I move back in? Specifically with the opioid crisis, mothers, older women who are getting pain medication often are in the dilemma where their kids may be their caregiver, and they end up taking from the mom her medication. So
Mhm.
actually, the colleagues did a study in Appalachia with Adult Protective Services to look at some of these intergenerational problems. When a mother realizes that her kid is taking her medication, I mean, it's such a great analogy that she allows herself to live with more pain
Mm.
to let her child not have to go to jail because he's stealing her medication. And
Mhm.
then they have to switch doctors. She has to keep going to
Mm.
new, different
Mhm.
doctors,
The
in,
doctor hopping.
right, in order to get the medication for her and for her child. In their paper, they talk about she was like really quite ill. She's in the nursing home, and her son takes her medication, and the nurse comes and says, "Where are all your pills?" She said, "Oh, I threw them up." The
Mhm.
mothers want to
Protecting.
completely protecting their kids, and not wanting their children arrested. But why it is that our society ignores, the safety net of people with all of these vulnerabilities. I think it's sexism. I think it's ageism. I think it's that women, as we get older, are just not seen. And in particular, there's an assumption that family will jump in. And particularly when we talk about family, we're talking about mothers.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, it reminds me of the whole caregiving, right? That there's just an assumption that the mother or the daughter will step up, which saves, our millions and millions of dollars.
billions, billions, billions.
Billions, I see. So it falls on the mother, instead of, as you say, there's no safety net. So the mother who is aging, if this is an adult child, and maybe really looking forward to maybe retirement or maybe slowing down, is now really shouldering the burden of these problems.
Absolutely. And she doesn't have anyone to talk to, because there becomes a lot of shame involved in
Mhm.
having a child who's an addict and having a child who has psychiatric problems. There's enormous stigma about mental illness. There's an assumption in our society that mothers cause mental illness, and mothers are
Mhm.
afraid that if they let anyone know how troubled their child is, that they will be viewed as a bad mother, and they
Mhm.
stop talking to their friends. They often stop talking even to their family because there's so much judgment and so much advice. So women become extremely isolated, feel great shame, and really need the support of other people in a formal way, because they've lost their informal supports with their family and friends.
One of the things that I thought was so powerful in your book, I mean, the whole thing was powerful, but you really got to this profound dilemma that mothers feel, the love for their child, which of course is baked in, right? I mean, that's not only emotional, but physiological. And the dilemma of this kid is stealing from me, may be violent, may be doing things that are dangerous. And so you're being caught in this love, yet really being stuck with this is not a sustainable way to live.
Right. I call it torn in two. Um,
Mhm.
it's another way of talking about the ambivalence here, being pulled in two different directions. That on the one hand, what I heard, and we think of mothers being fully committed to their children when they're babies. We don't. We're willing to say, okay, I won't take my shower today. I won't sleep tonight.
Mhm.
When we have infants. And now that's even become a public dialogue. Everybody's, even movie actresses are willing to say how hard it is to have an infant and not sleep, etc. All the women that I interviewed, and I interviewed 50 women who were over 60 years old. And I didn't know, I was curious to understand what were the issues in their adult children's life that impacted them as older women as they aged. Because when I decided to begin on this project, I was aware that no one had really looked at this.
Mhm.
And what everybody talked to me about was this dilemma of whose needs take priority, mine or
Mhm.
my adult child's. Now, we
Mhm.
know this about moms with infants. We're willing to really be 24 hours devoted to our children, but we
Mhm.
assume that's going to pass.
Mhm.
The kid's going to grow up. They're going to start sleeping through the night. They're going to get toilet trained. It's going to change. And also with an infant whose every day is different, and there's so much wonderful new surprises and
Mhm. And they start
biomedical.
looking at you and smiling at you just at the time where you're about ready to throw in the towel.
Right, exactly. You get something back for all that you're doing. When you have an adult child who's depressed, sleeping in your basement, comes up maybe once every 3 days, eating your food in the middle of the night, you're not getting that smile of the 1 year old looking at you. You are
Mhm.
feeling worried, you're feeling disregarded, you're feeling disrespected, and you don't know how to help them or how to begin to put yourself back in the picture. And it's a horrible dilemma. There's no answer because our mental health and substance use service delivery system right now does not do what it needs to do to support families. And
Mhm.
moms are on their own. And if there's a dad, he's helping too. I did not interview fathers, so I can't really talk with any authority about how this impacts fathers. But I think parenting is gender specific, that I think women, because of our sense of how important our maternal identity is to us, experience mothering in a different way than fathers experience parenting. And I don't use the word parenting, and the same with caregiving. There's a feminist gerontologist who has pointed out that caregiving acts as if it's a gender neutral term. But in
Mhm.
fact, 85% of caregivers of older parents and certainly younger children are female. So
Mhm.
it's a particularly unique female problem that needs to be examined through a gendered lens, which is what I have done with older moms and their difficult adult children.
Mm. I'm wondering, as a clinician, as a researcher, as a mom, what was it like sitting with these 50 mothers of all walks of life, different economics, different ethnicities, how did that impact you?
Well, I was very moved that people, first of all, when I first talked to people, I didn't say, tell me about your troubled adult child. I started with their journey as a mom when the kids were little, because I didn't know if the problems in later life with an adult kid had begun when they were young, or did it change? First psychiatric breaks often happen when a child is about 19. So I wanted to develop a relationship by talking about themselves as moms, because most of us have really positive memories, whether they're accurate or not, about the
Mhm.
first couple of years. And I explained that I was a mom. I started the interview by saying, as my son got older, I realized that mothering did not end when our kids were 18, 19, 20, and there were problems that affected me and affected all moms. So I formed a relationship with the people, but I guess I had never sat in a room before where someone would walk me through what it was like when her adult daughter turned on her and started to strangle her.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
she was willing to share it with me. Some people cried as they talked about it, some didn't. But one thing that was pretty universal is when the whole and I saw everybody for an hour and a half twice. At the end of each interview, women sort of sighed, like this, oh my God, I can't believe I was able to tell someone everything that has happened. It
Mhm.
was such a relief. People just thanked me for asking them about something that they had buried and were keeping secret from so many people. It was such a relief to have me interested in it and be able to talk about it in a non judgmental
Mhm.
environment.
Sounds like it was really therapeutic without that being the goal, but just for them to be able to confide in you and feel safe. Uh,
Absolutely.
wow.
Right. And now I run support groups for mothers with difficult adult children.
Mhm.
And I am so impressed with how helpful it is and they're run virtually. So people are not even in the same room. But even in the very first session, being on the screen with 7 other women who are openly talking about how hard it's been for them to have their adult child have a psychiatric break, be addicted to fentanyl or opioids or having a drinking problem, and sit there in a room with a group of people who have experienced what they have. This one woman said in the first group with me last week, she said, I feel like this 100-pound weight on my
Mm.
heart is beginning to lift.
That must be so gratifying for you, Judy, as a clinician, as somebody who obviously cares about people's wellness, to see how effective and important this is.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a social worker. I taught social work for 25 years and always talked about the value of groups and
Mm.
support groups. But I have really been impressed with how valuable support groups are. And for your listeners, if you're in the situation, there are options that are free to join a support group. National Alliance of Mental Illness offers support groups for parents. Al-Anon has parent groups with other, mostly women come to talk about how this affects you. And, some therapists like myself do offer private groups. So it's really important, if you're in this situation, to find some place where you can openly talk with other people and learn how they're coping with it and get a different perspective on everything that you're doing now for your adult child and not feel so crazy. I think
Mhm.
that's the best thing about connecting to a support group, is you realize you're not alone. Because when you live with this alone, you feel like you're the only person in the world whose son is screaming at you, the only person in the world whose daughter is stealing your father's gold coins that you keep in a special lock cabinet. And you see that there's a nice lady who looks somewhat like you who also has the same issue. And you realize she's not a horrible person, so
Mhm.
maybe you're not a horrible person.
Yeah, the power of groups is hard to overstate. It's almost a magical, thing that
Right,
happens. I will often say that to my clients, that that's a whole different level, a different kind of healing. Um, one of the things that you talk about also in the book that I think is so helpful and thought provoking is how moms try to understand the behavior of their children. And you talk about some moms sort of split. Well, that's the addiction talking. My
right.
kid would never do that. Well, can you say more about that?
Well, it's very hard as a mother to see this baby who you raised and you gave everything to as someone who's screaming at you, someone who's calling you in terrible names, cursing at you, um, someone who is leaving the room in such a horrible mess. To really be able to think this is the same person who you are doing so much for. So having the idea that this is the illness, and it is the illness. Mental health is an illness of the brain. They are now seeing substance use dependency as a physical and genetic vulnerability.
Mhm.
But the idea of focusing on that is helps you to not feel so betrayed by your own son or daughter.
Yeah, that word betrayed really stands out to me. The idea that you birthed this child, and the level of sacrifice, and knowing that you missed out on things that you would have enjoyed or would have helped your career, and really kind of giving everything, your bone marrow to
Right,
your kids, and then having them be abusive
right,
is really that's
right,
so hard to reconcile.
right. And the 15th is actually World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
Mm.
And I actually think it was a poor choice of name to name it elder abuse, because I think so few of us, one, think of ourselves as elders, no matter
Mhm.
how old we are. And
Yes.
we don't like to think of our kids as perpetrators of abuse.
Mhm.
Um, so, the most likely perpetrator of elder abuse, when it's done within the family, not in nursing homes, is the adult child who is at home with a mental health or a substance use problem, financially dependent on their parents. That
Mhm.
is the most likely perpetrator within families. Right now is Elder Abuse Awareness Day, but so many people don't, even if your child is, screamed at you last night and threw a Coke bottle across the room because he was so frustrated, don't think of themselves necessarily as an elder abuse victim. We don't like to be victims, and we certainly don't want to think of our son as a perpetrator or a criminal.
Yes. Yes, I can totally see that that would be a disconnect. What would you do you have a name that you would prefer that would describe this phenomenon?
Well, maybe mother abuse, or I couldn't come up with the perfect name.
Mm.
But I think, difficult, it's difficult mothering. I mean, I hope as more and more people find my book useful, that the word difficult will be a way to begin to talk about what they're experiencing. Because
Mhm.
what's so hard for moms in this situation, even you go to the supermarket, you run into someone you haven't seen in 3 months. What's the first thing they ask you?
Mhm. How's your
How's
kid?
Right. How's your kid? And so the women in my group often try to problem solve with each other about what do you say in the supermarket? You just sort of smile. Some people say, oh, up and down. Some people say, oh, struggling. And some people just smile or try to avoid them and go to the other aisle.
Mhm.
But I think if we as a society understood that this is not this is not a teeny problem. This is a big problem. There's how many? I think it's 41 million people have a serious mental illness. So every single one of those has a mom and a dad who has had to cope with this. So
Mhm.
if we began to normalize this and understand that this is difficult, and if we started providing services for these families in their home, psychoeducation for parents who have a kid with substance use or serious mental illness, families would feel less alone and less weird.
Do you think I mean, yeah, I'm aware that, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal have picked up, interest in your book and your research. Are you feeling some optimism about this becoming, a topic to be discussed?
Well, I'm really glad that I mean, I've realized with the article in the New York Times that was on Mother's Day, actually, in the opinion section, what a wide reach it has, and I'm very grateful that people have found it. But it needs to be much, much more. But I think there are more moms who have coped with this, have become advocates.
Mm.
Leslie Carpenter, who I interviewed for my book, is now head of policy at the Treatment Advocacy Center. Teresa Pasquale is created a group called Housing That Heals. So moms are taking their despair and their anger and becoming advocates.
Mhm.
Not a lot of them, but some of them. And I think there is greater awareness that our mental health system is broken and we really need to do more.
Yeah, yeah, and it leaves moms in this terrible predicament because if you do have a violent child, you may not have a choice. You may have to involve law
Right.
enforcement, and then they're in the criminal system, and that is a complete hellscape. Uh,
Right. But
yeah.
some moms, if your child is homeless, the horrible thing about serious mental illness is something called anosognosia. It's a situation in which the brain of a person with serious mental illness doesn't recognize that they have a serious mental illness. So, therefore, they see no reason to take medication.
Mhm.
So, they can be living on the streets, doing weird things. And mothers are in a position where they hope their child will get arrested so that then they might be mandated for mental health treatment.
I see.
But
And yeah.
you have to be involved if your child does get arrested. You want to help them to ask for a mental health lawyer. Obviously, this varies by state, but there are more mental health lawyers who will do a hearing in jail Obviously it's not a good place to be. We have now more mentally ill people in prisons than we have in psychiatric hospitals.
Mhm.
This is not a solution. But if you have a child who is arrested, you can work with them. Again, it's your daughter or son has to be willing to say, I want a hearing. I have a mental health problem, which is hard to do. But if they have some way of thinking about that, and if they can get mandated medication, then you have a chance that they're going to get themselves back and their brain back and begin to get some real treatment.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think about jails and the stigma and the real unwillingness. I think it's not a compassionate place, right?
No, it's not.
And so these adult children are pretty vulnerable also. I mean, they're going to a place where, there's violence is a rule.
But one thing, I just spoke to a mom who lives in Oregon in a small town. And she has discovered that the police, they have a crisis team that really is very helpful. And
Mm,
you might want to, if you have a child, first of all, who you're afraid of, it's important to have a safety plan so that you make sure you're going to be safe. You can even put a little lock on your door to make sure that nobody's going to barge into your room at night. But getting to know the police officers in your
mhm,
community can
mhm.
be very important. So
I
if
have heard that. And some police, are getting more training in
right,
dealing with psychiatric crises.
yeah, and if you get to know them, that God forbid you have to call someone,
Mm.
maybe you'll be lucky. And now there's women on the police force that you will know the person who comes in. I mean, we've got a long way to go. I mean, many moms report that their kids get tasered when the police
Oh,
come, and
God.
it's horrendous. And some kids get shot, and particularly women of color are really afraid to
Mhm.
call the police because of all the racism. And, we hear
Right.
these stories over and over again
Oh.
about, a large young man.
Mhm. A young black man acting erratically, that is not gonna end well.
Right. So
Mm.
racism is a big part of all of this. But in terms of the moms, I interviewed Black, Hispanic, and white women, and the stories had many common themes. And this main question of, if not me, who? And
Mhm.
that's my son. How can I evict him? And
Mhm.
that horrible thing of, since we do not have rents are crazy. I mean, if you're a professional couple, if it's New York or a big city, it's impossible to
Yep.
find an apartment with two incomes, let alone if you're a vulnerable young woman who hasn't worked in 3 years. Where is she going to live? We do not
Yes.
have subsidized housing for vulnerable adults in this country. You know,
Do other countries do this better, Judy? I mean,
yes,
sometimes the US can really be behind in some of these civilized humanitarian matters. Tell me what countries we can look towards to help us understand how to do this better.
well, Sweden is sort of always been way ahead of us in
Mhm,
terms of social benefits for vulnerable people. So
mhm,
they have a lot of subsidized housing for people who have an addiction. In our country, you can't be actively using and get subsidized housing.
mhm.
In Sweden, you can. They have different houses, subsidized housing for people who are using and people who are trying to be clean.
Oh, that's so smart.
And they also have support groups from others. Um, but as somebody said to me when I was being interviewed by a journalist in Sweden, they're not perfect. But we certainly could do better, both in terms of, I mean, housing is a critical piece with all this,
Mhm,
and outpatient care. I mean, we have gotten rid of community
mhm.
outpatient care, and we don't have enough psychiatric beds for people who need to be hospitalized and get on really good medications.
Yeah, that is for sure. As a woman who yourself is older,
Mhm.
how is this in terms of you? your legacy, your work? How does it fit into what you want to be doing as an older professional woman?
Well, I recently retired, and this has been, I think we all know that retirement is not so easy,
Mhm.
unless you're a great golfer and have, yeah,
I wasn't going to guess that you were going to be golfing a lot.
right. But, my mother always told me that I should learn bridge. So when I retired, I'd have something to do. But I didn't. So instead, I found difficult. But it's very rewarding to meet other older women, and I feel so much respect for their resilience. And in my groups, I ask every woman, we take turns, and each person each week has to prepare a 25-minute talk about the key moments in her mothering journey of her difficult adult child.
Oh, wow.
This is a profound experience to really have to review all that you have done. Because when you're in it, you're just doing and you're doing and you're doing and you're
Mhm.
doing and you're worrying and you're worrying.
You're so dissociative, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not a sense that there's anything else to do. But when you have to really review it, people say, wow, I have really done a lot. I'm a good mother. I just
Mhm.
haven't been able to be a magician.
Oh, wow. What an interesting way to put it. Yeah, that well, it's this idea that mothers kind of form the child.
Right,
And, forgetting that we've got culture, we've got biology, we've got maybe even intergenerational trauma. I mean, there's
right,
so many pieces, right? But there's
right.
this sense that it's like your child is like clay and, you're the one who's responsible for forming them.
And some moms, because we now know the genetic tie to psychiatric illnesses, some moms, have said to me, you know, why didn't I think more when I married my husband? Why didn't I know that his grandfather had
Oh.
bipolar? As if
Oh.
it's our fault that we didn't do a
Mhm.
complete assessment
A
of
genogram.
in terms of mental illness. But a lot of
Oh,
them, most people don't even know about that, and within many families, it's not even talked about that
that's
Uncle
right.
Uncle Bill was
Mhm.
manic depressive.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems like a lot to ask. I mean, it's not like when you're dating, you're gonna do a
Right,
genogram and
right,
ask, "What are the psychiatric, illnesses in your family?" That's not something that ever happens.
right, right.
Mm.
Right.
Would you like to just leave our listeners who I know are is just such an important and fascinating, subject. Would you like to leave them with some thoughts before we wrap up today?
Well, I think the first thing, if you have an adult child who is very vulnerable, who is suffering with mental illness or substance use disorder, or just can't get it together to work, and they've turned back to you for emotional or residential support, first of all, know you are not alone. This is
Mm,
really a very wide societal problem, and to try to find some support for yourself. To
mhm,
join a group, first of all, you have to let yourself recognize. Uh, I talk about it in one chapter, to see or not to see. You have to help yourself
mhm,
recognize that your child really has a problem.
mhm,
It's not
mhm.
just they're a young
You
person.
can't love them out of this problem.
Right, exactly. And I think what's awful about all this is we realize the lack of our power as mothers when our kids are really in trouble. And we don't like that. We like to think that we really can do anything. And this makes you feel quite helpless. But I think I would hope that you would realize, one, you're not alone. Two, you didn't cause it. And three, you need help. You can't do this alone. You need a community. You need to be sitting with other mothers or mothers and fathers to be learning more about if it's mental illness or substance use. You need to learn more about it. You have to see how other people are handling it and
Mhm,
begin to make decisions that work for your family. I know that
mhm,
there are a few books out there that say, look, you've done all you can, say goodbye and move on with your life. That's not what I have found among the women that I talk to. People are not ready to say goodbye. They want to stay connected to their kids' lives. They want to do whatever they can, but they also want to be able to take care of themselves. And right now, with so little support for families, that ends up being a terrible choice.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to make time to go to the doctor. You have to make time to go to a support group. You have to make time to call a friend and go for a walk. And I know exercise, everybody knows exercise makes you less depressed. Exercising with your neighbor makes you even more or less.
More or less depressed. I love that. You got some social points there too.
Right.
Beautiful.
Right. But also, if they want to learn more about my work specifically,
Mm-hmm.
again, as you said, the book is Difficult: Mothering Adult Children Through Conflict and Change. And you can buy it on Amazon or your favorite online bookstore. And my website is, if you just remember Difficult Mothering,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get to my website, you'll get to my Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to my email. It's Judith R. Smith at difficultmothering.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I am starting I just started a set of support groups for the spring, and I'll be starting a new set in September. So if you
Mm-hmm.
email me or come to my website, you'll soon be able to register for those groups.
Beautiful. And it sounds like there are people all over. It's not just New York.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly.
What a beautiful resource, because there's not many resources out there. And I was just going to say, follow up on something you said earlier when somebody says, how's your kid? Hard to answer, but also really hard when people in your world are having hugely successful kids.
Right,
Um, it can be very, very painful.
right. Going to weddings, grandchildren being born, you're not going to have any grandchildren. These are, real life events that you're missing
Mhm.
out on if your kids' problems interfere with their being able to have loving relationships. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's, there's a lot of, I use a phrase that a social worker created in the 50s called chronic sorrow, that
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
carry this sorrow for our child, that
Mhm.
they didn't become the artist they could have been, they didn't become the musician they could have been, and you didn't have the pleasure of having an adult child who can engage in a reciprocal, wonderful relationship. I mean, if someone is taking their medication or goes for rehab, you have an opportunity to get your kid back, and they have an opportunity to get themselves back. So it's really
Mhm.
untreated mental illness that is the problem. And
And also with the rehab, I would think that you're always holding your breath, right? Like, okay, we're having this lovely conversation, but when are you going to start using again? And I'm going to lose it.
mhm, right, so it's walking on eggshells
Yes.
is a phrase people talk about a lot. That you're afraid that really believe that in hope. As mothers, most people don't give up, and they will be there. I mean, as our responsibility in society and what we're supposed to do as mothers is be there when our kids are in crisis. But we're also supposed to launch our children. So we have two different things that we're supposed to do, and that's what makes mothering adult children so hard. I mean, even your friends who have very successful children are trying to figure out how much money do we give for the house, how much money do we do for this, and parents with successful kids give a lot of money to their kids.
Mm.
Uh, so all families are wanting their kids to do well. We want a legacy among our children, and we want to be able to help them. And that includes people whose kids are very vulnerable.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I just feel so fortunate to have been able to have this conversation with you, Judy. It is just profoundly important, and I know it will mean a lot to our listeners. Thank you so much for your work, and so appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. Clearly, you understand the value of being able to tune into a mother's experience, and it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zestful Aging. If you like the podcast, please share it with some of your friends. Our theme song is All I Did Was Wait for You by Kjartan Abel. Visit Kjartan-Abel, that's KJARTAN-Abel, ABEL.com to hear more of Kjartan's work. And our technical director is Stephen Litweiler. And stay tuned next week for another interview with a fascinating and inspiring guest. See you then.